September 1st, 1985, the North Atlantic. In the dead of night, 2.5 miles beneath the waves, a ghostly shape flickered onto a monitor in the control room of the research vessel Knorr. It was a massive boiler, an unmistakable relic from a bygone era. For 73 years, the world had searched for this prize. Just weeks earlier, a state-of-the-art French expedition had abandoned their hunt in this very spot, declaring it a barren wasteland. This single image was the stunning climax to the story of how French archaeologists claimed the Titanic was lost forever, until Americans found it in days, thanks to a secret Cold War mission and a revolutionary new way of seeing. The story of the hunt for the RMS Titanic is not merely a technical tale. It is a narrative of obsession, frustration, and the crushing reality of the deep ocean. After the unsinkable ship went down in the North Atlantic on April 15, 1912, taking more than 1,500 souls with her, she vanished. In the immediate aftermath, the focus was on the human tragedy, the inquiries, and the reforms to maritime safety. But as the years turned into decades, the ship itself transformed into a legend, the Mount Everest of shipwrecks. For a handful of ambitious explorers, she became the ultimate prize, a ghost waiting to be found in an abyss more hostile and inaccessible than outer space. The sheer scale of the challenge was staggering, a puzzle of physics and geography that defied human ingenuity for generations. The Titanic lay somewhere in a search area covering hundreds of square miles of chaotic canyon-filled seabed. The water above pressed down with a weight of over 6,000 pounds per square inch, a force capable of turning a pickup truck into a flattened sheet of metal. It is a world of absolute eternal darkness, where the temperature hovers just above freezing. For the first half-century after the sinking, the technology to even reach these depths, let alone search them, simply did not exist. The legend only grew in the suffocating silence. Early proposals to find and even raise the wreck were exercises in fantasy. One plan suggested filling the ship with ping-pong balls to make it float. Another involved pumping it full of molten wax. A more dramatic idea proposed attaching giant electromagnets to a fleet of barges and simply lifting the entire 882-foot hull to the surface. These were dreams, not plans, and they all fizzled out against the harsh reality of the deep. For decades, the Titanic remained untouched, a silent monument guarded by unimaginable pressure. The tide began to turn in the 1960s and 70s. The Cold War, an era of intense geopolitical rivalry, inadvertently became the great accelerator of deep-sea exploration. The race between the United States and the Soviet Union to dominate the undersea realm spurred incredible advancements. Sophisticated sonar, deep-diving submersibles, and remotely operated vehicles were developed not for archaeology, but for submarine warfare and espionage. As this technology became available to the civilian world, a new generation of hunters emerged, and the quest for the Titanic moved from fantasy to feasible. One of the most famous and flamboyant of these hunters was Texas oil millionaire Jack Grimm. A man who seemed to relish impossible quests, Grimm had previously funded expeditions to find Noah's Ark, the Loch Ness Monster, and Bigfoot. In the early 1980s, he declared that his next target was the Titanic. Grimm was not a scientist, but he knew how to attract talent and media attention. He assembled a team from respected institutions like the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and Columbia University. He chartered top-of-the-line research vessels and poured millions of dollars into the search. His strategy was a brute force approach that became the standard for the era: mowing the lawn. His teams dragged sophisticated side-scan sonar equipment developed by the legendary Harold "Doc" Edgerton of MIT back and forth across the suspected wreck site in a painstaking grid pattern. On his first expedition in 1980, they found an object on the sonar that looked tantalizingly like a giant propeller. The news flashed around the globe. Headlines declared the Titanic had been found. Grimm triumphantly held a press conference, but when they lowered cameras to investigate, the propeller resolved into a disappointingly ordinary rock. His subsequent expeditions in 1981 and 1983 followed a similar pattern of high hopes and crushing disappointment. They found more sonar anomalies, more almosts, but the great ship remained elusive. Grimm's high-profile failures had a chilling effect on the entire endeavor. If a man with a virtually bottomless checkbook and the best scientific minds he could hire couldn't find it, who could? The skepticism in the oceanographic community was palpable. More troubling was the growing consensus that the ship might have been buried by underwater landslides or disintegrated completely, rendering it invisible. The impossible was becoming accepted fact. This is where the French entered the picture, determined to succeed where the brash American millionaire had failed. By the early 1980s, the French National Oceanographic Institute, IFREMER, Institut Français de Recherche pour l'Exploitation de la Mer, was a global powerhouse in deep-sea exploration. They possessed a research vessel, Le Suroît, equipped with a revolutionary new piece of technology, a deep-towed, high-resolution side-scan sonar called SAR, or Sonar Acoustique Remorqué. This device was a generation ahead of what Grimm had used. It could paint a remarkably detailed acoustic picture of the seabed, a masterpiece of French engineering. With national pride on the line, Ifremer announced it would be launching its own grand expedition in the summer of 1985. They were confident that where money and bravado had failed, French science and methodical precision would triumph. They were not just hopeful, they were certain they would solve the 73-year-old mystery once and for all. They believed their technology was foolproof, but what they were about to find would only deepen the mystery. While the French were marshaling their national resources for their high-tech assault on the North Atlantic, an American oceanographer named Robert Ballard was hatching a quiet, audacious plan of his own. Ballard, a scientist at the prestigious Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, WHOI, in Massachusetts, had been captivated by the Titanic since his youth. But he was no mere dreamer. He was a pioneering geologist who had helped confirm the theory of plate tectonics, a former naval intelligence officer, and a visionary in the field of underwater robotics. He knew that finding the Titanic wasn't a matter of money, but of methodology. It required a new way of seeing, and a revolutionary piece of technology that he would have to invent. The story of how Ballard secured the funding for his quest is a real-life spy thriller, a chapter of the Cold War that remained a classified secret for decades. By the early 1980s, Ballard's proposals to search for the Titanic had been rejected by numerous funding agencies. The mission was seen as too expensive, too risky, and ultimately just an archaeological stunt. But Ballard held an ace up his sleeve, his connection to the U.S. Navy. He approached the Office of Naval Research with a proposal that was as brilliant as it was unorthodox. He knew the Navy was haunted by the loss of two of its nuclear submarines in the Atlantic during the 1960s. The USS Thresher, a state-of-the-art attack submarine, went down in April 1963 during deep diving tests, taking all 129 men on board with it. It was the deadliest submarine disaster in history. Then, in May 1968, the USS Scorpion and its 99 crew members vanished without a trace while returning to port. The losses were devastating blows to the Navy's pride and prestige. But there was a deeper, more pressing concern. The submarines were powered by nuclear reactors, and the Scorpion was carrying two nuclear-tipped torpedoes. The Navy desperately needed to know what had happened to them. They needed to assess the wreckage, determine the cause of the sinkings, and most importantly, monitor the state of the nuclear reactors and weapons to see if they were leaking radioactive material into the ocean. With Soviet submarines constantly probing the Atlantic, these wreck sites were matters of extreme national security. Ballard's deal was a masterpiece of strategic bargaining. He told the Navy, "You want to find your submarines and survey them in secret. I have the expertise and the ideas for the robotic technology to do it for you. Fund me to build these robots and conduct these missions. And when I'm done, let me use the leftover ship time to look for the Titanic." The Navy was skeptical. Finding the Titanic sounded like a frivolous treasure hunt, but Ballard expertly framed it as the perfect cover story. He argued that the world's media, and, more importantly, the Soviets, could be told he was on a grand, highly publicized quest for a famous ocean liner. No one would ever suspect his true, clandestine military mission. The Navy agreed. The deal was struck in secret. Ballard received the funding he needed, but under a strict set of conditions. The submarine missions were the absolute priority. He would have to find the Thresher, then find the Scorpion, and complete a thorough photographic investigation of both wreck sites. Only then, with whatever time remained, could he pursue his personal obsession. What no one, not even Ballard, could have predicted was that this secret military detour would provide him with the single, crucial insight needed to find the Titanic. The submarine missions were a stunning success. Ballard and his team located and meticulously mapped both wrecks, more than 10,000 feet deep. While studying the debris of the Scorpion, Ballard had his eureka moment. The submarine hadn't sunk in one piece. The immense water pressure had caused it to implode with catastrophic force, shattering it into thousands of pieces. He observed how the ocean currents had sorted the debris on the seafloor, creating a long, comet-like trail that stretched for over a mile. The heaviest components, like the reactor compartment, were at one end, while a fan of lighter wreckage trailed behind. He instantly realized that this was the key. Every previous Titanic searcher, including Jack Grimm and the French, was making the same fundamental mistake. They were looking for the ship itself, a single, massive object that was, in the vastness of the ocean, a tiny needle in an enormous haystack. Ballard's breakthrough was revolutionary. Stop looking for the needle and start looking for the haystack. He theorized that the Titanic must have suffered a similar fate, breaking apart as it plunged into the abyss and leaving a trail of wreckage. This debris field would be a much larger, easier target. If his team could find a single piece of debris, a boiler, a deck chair, even a china plate, it would be the first breadcrumb on a trail that would lead them directly to the main wreck. Armed with this new theory and his Navy funding, Ballard and his engineering team at Woods Hole perfected the technology to execute his vision. They created a revolutionary two-robot system. The star was Argo, a 12-foot-long, 2,000-pound steel sled packed with powerful strobe lights and sensitive video cameras. Towed from the surface ship, Argo could fly about 100 feet above the ocean floor, sending live video back to a control room around the clock. Paired with Argo was ANGUS, a simpler but powerful camera sled designed for taking high-resolution still photographs. With this system, Ballard's team could see the deep ocean floor in real time, in a way no one ever had before. In the summer of 1985, his secret mission for the Navy complete, Ballard finally turned his ship, the RV Knorr, toward the Titanic search area. He had just 12 days left on his contract. The clock was ticking. The French had already searched the area and declared it empty. Ballard was sailing into what the world's experts called a dead end. The French expedition, officially known as the Titanic/SAR mission, began in late June of 1985 with a level of confidence befitting a world leader in marine technology. The team from IFREMER, led by the seasoned oceanographer Jean-Louis Michel, was not a group of adventurers, but of serious scientists and engineers. Their vessel, the 75-meter Le Suroît, was a floating laboratory, and their prize technology, the SAR sonar system, was a source of immense national pride. This Sonar Acoustique Remorque was a 20-foot-long, 5-ton towed vehicle designed to fly a few hundred feet above the seabed. It emitted powerful acoustic pulses and listened for the echoes, painting a detailed black and white picture of the ocean floor's topography and any objects on it. It could scan a swath nearly a mile wide on each pass, making it the most efficient deep-sea mapping tool on the planet. Their strategy was the epitome of French logic and methodical planning. They plotted a precise 150 square mile search box based on the Titanic's last reported position in the known drift of the lifeboats. They would then mow the lawn, guiding Le Suroît in a series of perfectly parallel lines, ensuring that every square foot of the primary search area was scanned by the SAR. The massive 882-foot hull of the liner would, they were certain, be impossible to miss. It would appear on their sonar readouts as a colossal, unmistakable shape. For 5 grueling weeks, through July and into early August, the crew of Le Suroît executed this plan with relentless dedication. Life on the ship fell into a monotonous rhythm dictated by the demands of the sonar. In the control room, technicians watched as the SAR sent its data up the miles-long tow cable, where it was processed and printed out on long rolls of thermal paper. Every new chart was eagerly examined for any anomaly, any shadow that didn't look like a natural feature. The anticipation was immense, but day after day, week after week, the charts revealed nothing but the empty, undulating contours of the seabed. They mapped underwater canyons, ridges, and vast plains of mud, but there was no sign of a shipwreck. The team covered nearly 80% of the designated search box, an area larger than many cities. They meticulously eliminated vast tracts of the ocean floor, conclusively proving where the Titanic wasn't. This process of elimination was scientifically valuable, but it was a bitter consolation prize. Fuel was low, the crew was exhausted, and a sense of profound disappointment had settled over the vessel. The underwater desert remained a desert. In the final analysis, their failure was a story of being both technologically brilliant and strategically flawed. Their mowing the lawn approach was based on a single critical assumption, that the Titanic was a single, large object. Their powerful sonar was optimized to find a massive hull, but its resolution was not fine enough to reliably pick up a scattered field of smaller objects. They were hunting for an elephant with a net designed to catch only elephants, blind to the trail of footprints and broken branches the elephant might have left in its wake. The ultimate cruelty of their expedition was revealed years later. Post-discovery analysis of their ship's logs showed that on one of their final passes, Le Suroît had sailed within just a handful of miles of the actual wreck site. They were agonizingly close. A slight change in course, one more day of searching, a different interpretation of a faint sonar smudge. Any of these could have changed history, but weather, time, and a flawed core assumption conspired against them. They had mowed a giant lawn with impeccable precision, but had stopped just inches from the prize. When the French mission officially ended in early August, Jean-Louis Michel and his team were forced to admit defeat. They had conducted the most sophisticated search in history and found nothing. The official conclusion was tinged with scientific caution and a hint of weary resignation. Perhaps the ship had been completely buried by decades of sediment. Perhaps it had been obliterated by an underwater landslide. In interviews and reports, the sentiment was clear. If the French, with the world's best sonar, couldn't find it after a 5-week, multi-million-dollar effort, the task was likely impossible. They generously agreed to collaborate with the upcoming American expedition, handing over their charts and data. But for many, it felt like they were handing over a map to a dead end, a final testament to the unfindable ghost of the Atlantic. The French left behind a map of failure, but where they saw an empty space, Ballard saw a crucial clue. On August 24th, 1985, the RV Knorr, a vessel owned by the U.S. Navy and operated by Woods Hole, arrived in the desolate search area. Aboard was Robert Ballard, his American crew, and, in a remarkable act of scientific sportsmanship, Jean-Louis Michel, the leader of the just-failed French expedition. The mood on the ship was a complex blend of raw excitement and intense pressure. They were sailing into a region that had just been publicly declared barren by the world's best. More critically, Ballard's deal with the Navy was down to its final days. He had a mere 12 days to succeed, where others had failed for 73 years. It was an almost impossibly short window. Ballard immediately set his radically different philosophy into motion. Gathering his team, he laid out the plan. "We are not mowing the lawn," he insisted. "We are going to ignore the French search strategy. We are hunting for the debris field." He unrolled the charts provided by the French team, charts that showed vast areas of nothing. For Ballard, this negative data was a gold mine. It told him where not to look. He directed the Knorr to the southern edge of the search area, the part the French had been unable to cover due to bad weather and lack of time. It was a calculated gamble. The deployment of Argo began. The 12-foot steel sled, bristling with lights and cameras, was lowered over the side of the Knorr and began its 2.5-mile descent into the abyss. In the ship's control room, a space crammed with monitors and electronics, the team gathered. This room would become their world for the next 12 days. Unlike the French method of analyzing sonar printouts, the American approach was immediate and visual. A live video feed from Argo, grainy and monochromatic, flickered to life, showing the seabed in real time. The hunt was on. The first few days were a brutal test of mental and physical endurance. The crew was split into 4-hour watches, meaning the monitors were stared at, uninterrupted, 24 hours a day. The video feed was mind-numbingly monotonous. It showed an endless, featureless landscape of mud and ooze, occasionally disturbed by the gentle slope of an undersea rise or the ghostly passage of a deep-sea rat-tail fish. Keeping morale up was a constant battle. Doubt began to creep in. Jean-Louis Michel, aboard as a collaborator, watched the process, a living reminder of the recent French failure. Some of the American crew began to wonder if he and his team had been right all along. They were chasing a ghost in an underwater desert. Ballard remained the unwavering center of optimism. He spent most of his waking hours in the control room, which he called the Situation Room, encouraging the watchstanders, pointing out subtle geological features, and constantly reinforcing his debris field theory. The human element of this strategy was its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. A machine could miss a clue, but so could a tired human eye. Every person on watch carried the immense burden of knowing that a moment's lapse in concentration could mean missing the one small man-made object that would solve the entire puzzle. By the end of August, after nearly a week of searching, they had found absolutely nothing. They were more than halfway through their allotted time, with only 5 days left. The tension was becoming unbearable. Ballard knew that a failure here would not just be a personal defeat, it would likely be the end of the search for the Titanic for a generation. The funding would evaporate, and the world would accept that the ship was truly lost forever. His career, his reputation, and his lifelong dream were on the line. As the Knorr towed Argo slowly back and forth against the deep currents, the team began to feel they were running out of time, running out of hope, and running out of ocean. Then, just after midnight, as the calendar rolled over to the 1st of September, the desert began to show signs of life. A few strange shapes appeared on the seafloor, hinting that the endless expanse of mud was not as empty as everyone believed. The graveyard shift, from midnight to 4 in the morning, was usually the toughest watch in the Knorr's control room. It was a struggle against sleep and the hypnotic monotony of the seafloor scrolling by on the monitor. But in the early hours of September 1st, 1985, the silence was shattered. A young WHOI navigator on watch leaned closer to the screen, his eyes wide. He had spotted something. It was not a rock or a trick of the light. It was a distinct line of dark objects, stark against the pale sediment. He called out to his watchmate, "Wreckage!" The call went out over the ship's intercom. All hands to the control room. Robert Ballard, who had been lying awake in his bunk, was the first to arrive. He found the room buzzing with an electric energy that had been absent for days. On the screen, Argo was gliding over what was unmistakably a field of debris. There were twisted pieces of metal, lumps of coal, and other man-made objects. It was the breadcrumb trail he had theorized about for years. They had found the haystack. Ballard, remarkably calm, gave the order to follow the trail, working up current. The atmosphere in the room was a volatile mix of scientific focus and pure, unadulterated joy. The 73-year search was coming to an end. For the next 90 minutes, the team was glued to the monitors, watching in stunned silence as the debris field grew thicker and the objects became larger and more recognizable. They passed over a ship's winch, then what looked like a bed frame. Then, at approximately 1:45 in the morning, almost the exact time the Titanic had slipped beneath the waves, a colossal cylindrical shape emerged from the darkness. It was massive, round, and covered in a uniform pattern of giant rivets. There was no doubt what it was. It was one of the Titanic's 29 enormous boilers. A chorus of jubilant shouts erupted in the control room. People were hugging, cheering, and crying. They had done it. Against all odds, with only days to spare, they had found the unfindable wreck. The sense of triumph was overwhelming. But as they continued to trace the debris field from the boiler, the mood began to shift. The true significance of their discovery began to sink in. Then, the ultimate prize appeared. Looming out of the deep, looking like a ghostly specter from another world, was the bow of the great ship. It was sitting upright on the ocean floor, majestic and impossibly grand, even in its decay. The image was surreal. The ship's wooden deck had been devoured over the decades by wood-boring organisms, but its immense steel structure was eerily preserved in the freezing, oxygen-poor water. The crew could clearly see the anchor cranes, the capstans, and the forward mast, which had collapsed across the deck. A profound sense of reverence and melancholy descended upon the control room. The cheering stopped, replaced by a quiet awe. They were not just looking at a famous shipwreck. They were looking at a mass grave, a silent tomb for the 1,500 souls who had perished on that terrible night. In the final 4 days of their expedition, the team worked tirelessly to document their historic find. They used Argo and the still camera sled Angus to capture thousands of haunting images. They mapped the entire wreck site, making another shocking discovery. The ship had broken in two, just as many survivors had claimed. The stern section was found nearly 2,000 feet away from the bow, a mangled, imploded wreck, testament to its violent corkscrewing plunge to the seabed. This confirmed Ballard's debris field theory in the most dramatic way possible. The news of the discovery became an instant global phenomenon. It was the lead story on every network, the headline of every newspaper. Ballard and his team were hailed as heroes. It was a stunning technological and scientific triumph that instantly established American deep-sea exploration as the best in the world. The French team, who had been so agonizingly close, graciously offered their congratulations, their near miss now a permanent bittersweet footnote in the story. For the people watching this incredible story unfold, it was a moment of pure wonder. But it also raised a storm of questions. How did this happen so fast, seemingly overnight? Was there a missing detail, a secret that explained the French failure and the American success? The thing is, the discovery was no miracle. It was the direct result of a paradigm shift in thinking, an achievement built upon the lessons learned from past failures. And at its core was a secret military mission, a Cold War bargain that gave Ballard the unique opportunity to study how things fall apart in the deep ocean. The French method was not wrong. It was simply asking the wrong question. They were looking for a ship when they should have been looking for its ghost trail. The discovery of the Titanic was a monumental achievement, but it opened a new debate. Should the wreck be salvaged for treasure or preserved as a memorial? Was it right to disturb a sacred gravesite? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.